So, as of recording, we're a little under a week from Donkey Kong Bonanza being released to the masses, so we can all get our scaly mitts on it and smash up as much terrain as we please while powering up into various Bonanza forms thanks to DK's best buddy in the world, Pauline, who is now a 13-year-old child. Huh. Yeah, it's fair to say that this game's story, or at least what we know about this game's story so far, doesn't really add up alongside the last few Mario and DK adventures. In fact, it even seems to contradict itself, with Donkey finding crates labeled NDC, which presumably stands for New Donk City, and Cranky of course being his curmudgeonly old self and complaining about the new baddies, quipping, and I quote, "In my day, rivals had charisma, even in overalls." Heh. A clear reference to his days as the arcade Donkey Kong throwing barrels at Mario. So if all these little contradictions surrounding the game and its relative place in the DK timeline, not to mention the nature of young Pauline,
or as I like to call her, Smalline,
in hand, plenty of Nintendo fans, long time and new, took to the internet to begin speculating, putting their collective brain power together and formulating a way that this could all make sense alongside the rest of DK and Mario's adventures. Maybe it's time travel, some posited. Ooh, maybe there will be a twist where this turns out to be Pauline Jr., others suggested. But then, as they flooded the Digiverse with theories and ideas galore, a funny thing happened. The wider gaming community sat down, took a good hard look at the speculation, and said calmly,
"Nintendo doesn't and has never really cared for story relating to Mario characters."
When the fanbase shot back with evidence and even story connections that did carry between games, they were met with a rebuttal of
headcanon and overthinking,
which sort of got on my goat, to be honest. It's a weirdly dismissive response to people just having fun and starting a discourse about the game they're looking forward to. Now, I'm not trying to paint anybody in a negative light here, and I do have to preface before we proceed, please, please, please do not go harassing anyone or trying to explain to them why they're wrong. I don't want this to turn into some sort of online war of verbal shit-flinging. If you want to debate, then that's fine, but please remember to keep it civil. I'm also trying to keep this from becoming an angry rant about how anybody is dismissing the DK discourse as wrong, because truthfully, I'm not angry. In fact, I find myself confused and at worst a bit frustrated by the response, because I just don't understand where this idea that Donkey Kong has no story, or that people shouldn't care about it and just turn their brains off to the plot, especially when other Nintendo series demonstrate that you can have a fun, colorful platforming adventure that still has heaps of hidden lore. Kirby is probably the perfect example of such a game. HAL and Nintendo have absolutely put a ton of care and attention into Kirby's overarching story, despite it not really being important or even something most players would really care about if it wasn't there. The lore is there because it adds an extra level for fans to pore over and engage with. In my opinion, Donkey Kong is the same way. Okay, you're obviously not going to get Bethesda-level world building out of it, but there is an underlying lore that's remained mostly consistent. Not to mention plenty of subtle but nevertheless present story arcs in the games. In fact, the rare trilogy of Donkey Kong Country games were stuffed with them. Characters like Wrinkly and Swanky Kong go through little evolutions as the trilogy played out and led into DK64. For instance, when we meet Wrinkly Kong in DKC2, she's working at the Kong College, helping our protagonists with helpful little hints and letting them save their game. In DKC3, she fills the same role, but now she's doing it from the comfort of her own home, which she's turned into Wrinkly Save Cave. And we also see she's working on her health a little more, wearing exercise gear and even doing little hip stretches between her idols, in between the few sessions of Mario 64, of course. Okay, nothing too weird, work got hectic, so she decided to settle down and retire. She even says so herself. But I'm sure that won't lead into anything. Oh shit, she's dead! Yeah, Wrinkly's just dead in DK64, appearing as an apparition to guide DK on his adventure, Force Ghost style. When we string Wrinkly's appearances together, we see a story form here between 2, 3, and 64. She starts as a working woman in 2, only to then retire because of the stress and try to improve her health in 3, and then finally pass away by the time of DK64. And none of this is headcanon. It's all directly in the games, and it demonstrates that the folks at Rare actually cared about the continuity behind their characters and their world. And it wasn't just Rare who cared about maintaining continuity either. Retro Studios also made sure to string together some connective tissue in their duology of games, Returns and Tropical Freeze. Tropical Freeze is littered with callbacks to Returns, from recurring characters like Squidicus the Octopus and the Big Squeakly appearing in both games, to Tropical Freeze's final world straight up being Donkey Kong Island from Returns, which each level in that world acting as both a reference and a remix of the previous game's various worlds, reusing enemies, obstacles, and background elements as Easter eggs to remind you that this is still the same place from your last adventure, despite what the Snowmads have done. Hell, probably the most undeniable bit of world building in the series comes from the very opening of the first Donkey Kong Country, when Cranky is confirmed to be the original Donkey Kong from that arcade classic, as he stands atop the red girders from that game and plays its theme song before the new DK brushes him aside and starts blasting that new shit from his boombox. Now, obviously, this intro is meant to represent Donkey Kong Country becoming the new phase of the series, so to speak, the evolution of Donkey Kong, if you will. But on a literal level, it forms a clear and undeniable timeline for the series, establishing DKC as taking place after that original trilogy of arcade games, and telling us not just what became of the very very first Kong, but how his proud lineage continued into the then modern era. If that's not a perfect example of setting up lore in a series and demonstrating that there's an overarching story to all this, then frankly, I'm not sure what is. All this to say that even if story isn't always the most important aspect of a DK game, it's definitely a factor that does get accounted for, even when the big banana lover is under different folks. Now yeah, Nintendo EPD, who are developing DK Bonanza, may not care as strongly, but I don't think they're willing to throw out the story that they established with Mario Odyssey. One of that game's most memorable set pieces is a giant callback to the original arcade Donkey Kong, Pauline making multiple references to her kidnapping by Cranky Kong. She even quizzes Mario on those very events. Sure, I've seen some people say that she might be retroactively referring to Void King, but dog, I'm sorry, you can't look at this sprite and tell me that's a representation of Void Kong. Look at this sprite next to Mogwai Slickback here and tell me those are meant to be the same character with a straight face. No, I think there's much more of a story to Donkey Kong Bonanza than we know so far, and the folks at EPD aren't just completely disregarding what came before lore-wise for a gameplay reason. Hell, this whole game is filled to the brim with references to Donkey Kong's past, both arcade and country. This game is being made by people who ultimately know their DK, and so I think they can line everything up in Bonanza with what came before. Alright, but my goal here isn't really to sit down and empirically prove the doubters wrong or whatever. After all I can do is point out patterns at the end of the day because if I'm honest, I don't really know more than anyone else. I'm just going off what's in the games, both past and present, while making observations. I could be totally wrong, and the devs behind Bonanza could have no fucking explanation for Smolene. All I'm trying to say here is that, in my opinion, story does matter in Donkey Kong, or at least it did in the series past, and I think it still does here in Bonanza. So, with that said, what's the real point of this video at this point? Well, honestly, just to ask why. Ask why people are told not to care about something they clearly have such a deep adoration and passion for. Something that's clearly fun for them to discuss. Why is Donkey Kong speculation of all things the final straw that people need to come out and disavow or quell or belittle whatever their point seems to be with telling people they shouldn't be speculating about Donkey Kong? Well, if I were to wager a guess or two, a few potential reasons come to mind, and so I'd like to put them out there into the world and see if they help make sense of it all. Not to clap back or anything, but just to start a discussion and try to make sense of what we're seeing online in relation to Bonanza discourse. The first potential reason, and the one that's taken the deepest root into my mind, goes beyond Donkey Kong and into pop culture at large. Over the past 2 decades, video games, superheroes, and a lot of interests that people used to consider nerdy, quote unquote, have become dominant in pop culture, and this has led their fandom-focused properties and their associated, well, fandoms being shunted into the public spotlight. Things that used to feel culturally niche 20 years ago are now mainstream, and that's meant the conversation around those interests has become a lot more prevalent, especially with social media being thrown into the mix. This means you're going to have a lot more voices weighing in to give their opinion, and sometimes people are just going to butt heads or find it difficult to really understand each other's positions. Two people can end up enjoying the same thing for completely different reasons and end up debating over which reasoning is more important. Let's take the new Dooms, for example. I love those games for the insanely tight combat, immensely explorable levels, and exaggerated gore. I just have fun duking it out with demons as the Doom Slayer. I don't really care for the story involving Argent Energy or Samuel Hayden or any of that, but for some people, that story may have been exactly what drew them into those games and kept them coming back for more. And guess what? That person's perspective is equally as valid as mine. Neither of us are right in that situation. All that it means is that if I see that person on social media put out this big, long theory about where the story might go, I'm not really going to engage with it because that's not where my interests in Doom lie. I do think some people lose sight of their differences and assume anyone engaging with a piece of media for a reason other than why they do personally is doing it wrong or looking at it from the wrong perspective. I don't think that instinct comes from malice or a desire to ruin people's fun, but in their heart of hearts, a lot of folks do like to feel as if they're right about something, even something as ultimately subjective as art and entertainment. Another reason that relates to the first is that when you're so surrounded by fandom online, if it's something you see on a daily basis, regardless of if you want to or not, it's easy to feel exhausted by it. This happened with superheroes hard. I remember growing up and reading think pieces on the superhero about how they were the modern mythology and how they mean so much to so many people. Hell, they mean a lot to me. Now, after the MCU has dominated cinema since '08, though, constantly pumping out superheroes superhero movies and generally being ever present through merch, spin-offs, and the like, I think a lot of folks have sort of soured on it. They're tired of superheroes. They're just another corporate product, and they find it cringe that anyone would put so much of their personal identity into a product. It's the same reason the label Disney adult gets slapped on anybody who likes heading out to the park or even just keeping up with the latest Pixar films. Eventually, you just want those people to shut the fuck up about whatever Iron Man or Spider-Man is up to today. While I don't think superhero fatigue necessarily manifests at the box office, it sure does in the collective perception of the superhero in general. I think the same train of thought is expressed with Nintendo. While Nintendo has always been popular, they exploded into cultural dominance after the Switch surpassed even their previous height of the Wii. There's Nintendo theme parks, movies, and of course, plenty of video games. And Nintendo fans have always been incredibly passionate about what the company makes, to what some might argue is a detrimental or sycophantic degree, accepting what would otherwise be unacceptable practices. This makes it easy to write off hardcore Nintendo fans as corporate shills who place too much importance on their latest Mario branded pack of condoms or whatever. When it becomes mainstream, it becomes counterculture to bash it, to knock it down a peg and dismiss anyone who enjoys it just a little too much. Now, I'm not going to defend Nintendo as a company. Fuck no. They're a multi-million-dollar corporate entity just trying to line their pockets, same as the rest of them. And I do think Nintendo fans, myself included, are maybe a little too forgiving of their bad actions from time to time. But no, I think tying your perception of the company to the perception of people who love series like Donkey Kong is maybe throwing the baby out with the bathwater a little bit, and it ends up giving you a myopic view of what can be some really fun, welcoming fan bases. Though, with that said, there is the other side of the coin, and that brings us to our last reasoning. As we look back to the 2010s and see nerd and pop culture further intertwined with each other, there are more than a few times where what we might consider nerd culture or fandom chose not to collectively conduct itself with the most tact, with key cultural moments such as Gamergate and the reaction to films such as the 2016 Ghostbusters or The Last Jedi. It's no real secret that fandoms can carry these, let's be honest, crazed little fucking monsters in them who do end up making the conversation insufferable for anybody else trying to partake, and that's often by design. I wonder if seeing the passion for these sort of things get twisted into hateful little mobs carrying out harassment campaigns has made that passion in and of itself a red flag for some people, and so they try to avoid any community centered around said passion, regardless of what it's for. Online personalities and organizations in particular might even feel the need to dissuade an excess of passion a little so that way it doesn't get out of hand. When you're someone with an online platform, you should, in theory at least, try to use that platform somewhat responsibly and keep your audience from taking things overboard and lashing out if a piece of media doesn't turn out exactly the way they want it to. I understand the desire to err towards caution in these matters, but even with that in mind, I think trying to talk down to your fans for engaging with the material they enjoy engaging with, a lot of outlets and YouTubers ended up doing, in my opinion, whether they intended to or not, is a bit counterproductive because it makes you look like a fucking buzzkill. I think presenting your argument as a civil disagreement and less of this objective correction of Donkey Kong fans asking for or speculating about an explanation for Smalling's presence in Bonanza would make the people you're trying to speak to more receptive to your message. Again, I'm sure many of the people making posts, videos, or articles about this aren't trying to be antagonistic, but, at least to me, it feels like you're trying to tell me why I'm wrong, and that's not something I'm going to respond well to. And to be fair, there's certainly things you need to tell people they're wrong about, but speculation around a new fucking Donkey Kong game just isn't one of those things. I don't think it's such a serious issue that you need to do that. Look, perhaps I'm overthinking all of this at the end of the day. Admittedly, this video has been one part discussion starter and another part vent session after seeing the reaction to DK fans ever since the direct, so instead of just continuing the ramble on, I'll say my final piece on the matter, or at least the final piece for this video. It's okay to care about Donkey Kong lore and to be passionate about these games and their stories, as silly as that may sound to someone on the outside. It's okay to be a little disappointed if this game ends up heavily retconning the series, but it's also completely okay just to not care about any of that and play the game to smash things up and collect bananas. All that I ask is that you don't try to diminish anybody else's enjoyment or tell them that they're not having fun correctly because they aren't doing it the way you would. We as human beings are a vast, diverse spectrum of personalities, opinions, and ideas, so when it comes to something as subjective as art, the disagreements we have should be celebrated and not downplayed. Feel free to enjoy Bonanza however you please. Theorize and wonder to your heart's content, and if anyone tries to dismiss that as a silly headcanon or tell you shouldn't care so much about a Nintendo monkey game, ask them why. Start a conversation and be willing to hear why they think that way, so as long as they're willing to hear you out on why you think the way you do. And if they aren't, then fuck them. Ignore them and keep loving Donkey Kong the way you love Donkey Kong. Alright, I want to kick this over to the viewer now. What do you think of this Donkey Kong conundrum. Do you think caring about the story or expecting any kind of proper explanation for Pauline is a silly thing and I just need to focus on the gameplay? Or are you like me? Do you care about the overarching Donkey Kong lore and want to discuss it with other people? Do you want Nintendo to give some sort of justification that allows Bonanza to fit in neatly with the country games, the arcade DKs, and Mario Odyssey? Do you think me even looking at the people saying the story doesn't matter is just me being a little oversensitive about all of this? Let me know in the comments or hit me up on social media. This is a conversation that I legitimately want to have, at least to give my side of the argument the best I respectfully can. So be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and always crank up the noise. I'll see you later.